Hi everyone, this is Frank Quinn from Heritage, Ohio. We will get started here in just a couple minutes. Hi again, I'm still Frank Quinn with Heritage Ohio, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Heritage Ohio's mission is to help. We're going to help. Oh, hey, here I am. Hey, I'm Frank Quinn with Heritage Ohio, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. At Heritage Ohio, our mission is to help people save the places that matter, build community, and live better. Today, for the second in our Preservation Month webinar series, Profiles in Preservation. Oh, shoot. First, I need to remind you, our 2019 Preservation Month photo contest, we are still open for entries, but it closes this Friday. So get us a picture of your favorite quote unquote urban renewal scene, and no stressful pictures of buildings being demolished, not that kind of urban renewal. This is the rejuvenation of your community. This is buildings being preserved. This is people out on the streets, all that great stuff. Send those photos into us by this Friday. And perhaps at the end of May, you will be announced as the big winner. So our next webinar is happening May 15th at 1 p.m. We're looking at preservation consulting. But today I am pleased to introduce to you Becky West of Columbus Landmarks, Joyce Barrett of Heritage Ohio, and our special moderator of the day, Danielle Steinhauser of CT Consultants. Today, we are diving into nonprofit leadership. So if you have ever wondered about all the ins and outs and the twists and turns of being a nonprofit leader in the preservation world, then sit back, relax, and enjoy a couple great presentations. I guess one of the things that I need to tell you is if you have any difficulties with your webinar, what you can try doing is logging out and logging back in with the webinar link that was provided with you earlier. Enough of that. Let's jump into it with Joyce Barrett.
Thank you, Frank. So what I put together were a few slides on how I got here and what I do. So I was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and there was this mansion, Bruce Moore, which was built in 1889, and it was gifted to the National Trust in 1981, and I was kind of smitten with this mansion. In fact, I'll be going there to visit again in a few weeks. When I was about 10 years old, I don't know why, my parents took me downtown to watch the Shrine Temple being demolished. And I remember being shocked, and I couldn't understand. Everything was still in it. It was obviously perfectly good. The seats, they could have put on a show, and they were demolishing this building, and it's totally confusing to me. Then a few years later, when we were on vacation, we went to the Rockcliffe Mansion in Hannibal, Missouri, and I was in love with this house. I was in love with this house and have been back a few times since because I loved this house. And not only is it a museum, but it's also one of our sort of progressive house museums that they also do bed and breakfast stays at this place, which I think is a great idea. So I went to college at Iowa State University, and I took every history class I could get. I took art history, I took history of costume, I took history of physics, I took the history of economics, and all of my classes were focused on history. My sophomore year, I was talking to one of my history professors, and he said, well, if you like this history stuff, why aren't you working for the Brunier Art Gallery? Also had this house museum, the Farmhouse Museum. This building was actually built in 1860. It was named a national landmark in 1964. It was restored in the 1970s to its 1910 appearance. And so it was opened as a museum in 1976. And I worked there as well as the art gallery during those 3 years of college. When I was working at the art gallery, one of my coworkers had had her internship at the Smithsonian Institution in the American History Museum, and I was like, what? I didn't know that was a thing, that you could work there. So immediately I sent in an application to be an intern at the American History Museum and was accepted. So I lived in DC from 78 to 79. My first day on the job, I polished a Mary Lincoln silver. I was just in heaven. It was a great time. And then, in addition to the silver, I did take the Smithsonian's conservation course that they put their curators through. So I spent the year, once a week, we'd have a 4-hour class on conservation methods. In February, actually it took a few months before February for Black History Month, I got to put this exhibit together. This is Lillian Rogers Parks. She wrote a book, Backstairs at the White House. She was a maid at the White House. Her mother had been a maid, so she'd actually gone to the White House when she was a little girl under the Taft administration. And these were artifacts and items that had been gifted to she and her mother from first families. So I got to do that little museum exhibit, which was big stuff back then. And there's also, she wrote a book, and it was a mini series on TV. So in 1979, I was married to my husband, Jim. And why I put this in here is Jim's an architect. So as a couple, we probably spend more time looking at architecture than your average couple. And I think that that had an influence on me. Right after we were married, we moved from Iowa to Arizona. And the curator that I worked for at the Smithsonian introduced me to Lee Tyson, who was the director of the Arizona Historical Society Phoenix Museum, which was located in this the Shackelford House at that time. And I started as a volunteer, and I volunteered and volunteered, and I didn't go away. And so they started paying me. So I worked my way into a little part-time gig. I also got to know the Phoenix Parks and Recreation Department. The Rawson House was built in 1895. It's on Heritage Square in downtown Phoenix. And they opened this as a museum in 1980. So I also worked on programming and research on the Rawson House while I was there. During that time period, something that I really had wanted to do since my time, I'd learned about it in Washington, was the Seminar for Historic Administration. I went the summer of 1981. You spent a month in Williamsburg, and every day they had a full day of lectures. This was a partnership between the National Trust for Historic Preservation, American Association for State and Local History, American Museum Association, and the National Park Service. So there were 18 of us, and they came from all different fields, and we, every day, all day long, we went through the process of board development, membership, curatorial practices, interpretive practices and things like that. And it was a wonderful experience. During the same time while I was in Phoenix, I went to ASU. This happens to be the Grady Gamage Auditorium that was done by the Frank Lloyd Wright Institute. And I got my MBA in 1982. In 1985, I was promoted to the Associate Executive Director position for the Arizona Historical Society, and the headquarters are actually down in Tucson. So we moved to Tucson, and my responsibilities there were mostly business functions, budget, personnel, purchasing, all of those various business functions, and working with the board of directors. After my daughter was born in 1988 in Arizona, we moved back to Iowa to be closer to friends and family. And we landed in Iowa City in this gorgeous house. I was so excited. We were actually renters at this time because we still owned a house in Tucson. But this is an 1884 Victorian, and we managed the restoration of this house. Our landlord lived a few houses up the street, and she really wanted to control what happened to the property. And because this was in a National Register historic district, and there are 12 houses there, somebody had to take a turn on the Iowa City Historic Preservation Commission, and I was the new one in town. So that was my job, was to do that. When we started this project, we were working it as a historic tax credit project. And as the law has changed, at that time, we came down to it and our accountant figured out that she was not eligible to take advantage of the historic tax credit, but the law has loosened up now and people can use rental income for historic tax credit. So that was a learning experience going through the part 1 and part 2, but I never did the part 3 because we found out she didn't qualify. While I was there, oh, that slide shifted. This is when I learned everything about preservation. There was a small local Friends group that was a nonprofit, Friends of Historic Preservation. And so I was working for them $100 a month to keep them afloat. I mean, check the mailbox, balance the checkbook, but I worked on a lot of different projects with them. The Guide to Historic Iowa City was a big fold-out walking tour map. The Who-To book was a resource guide to contractors and suppliers in historic preservation. As my role on the Historic Preservation Commission, we did a citywide historic preservation plan. The design book, I know that didn't scan that great, but it was the design ordinance. We worked as a team to develop the design ordinance guidebook for the community. And then we also ran a salvage barn. And what was fun about that, the salvage barn, the proceeds of the salvage barn all went to grants back to homeowners in the community. And we also worked really closely with the city and their CDBG program on project rehabilitations and using salvage materials. During that time, I started working part-time for Jan Nash, which was Tallgrass Historians then, and started doing survey and National Register nomination work, which was a lot of fun. And my boss then was on the board of the Iowa Historic Preservation Alliance, and they were just getting ready to hire their first staff person in 1995, and she recommended that I take that position. They've since changed their name to Preservation Ohio. So, oh, did I say Ohio? It's four letters and a lot of vowels, I know. So Preservation Iowa. So when I was there, I created a most endangered properties list, and I showed this was a Frank Lloyd Wright hotel in Mason City, Iowa. It was on our first list, and let me tell you, Mason City wanted to tear this down so bad. And of course, now it's a boutique hotel that everybody loves, and it's a destination for the whole state. So I worked on most endangered properties. We passed an Iowa Historic Preservation Tax Credit. We had Best Preservation Awards that the governor gave out, doing newsletter and membership, putting together a statewide conference and providing technical assistance and things like that. And I earned a whopping $7,000 a year at that job for 6 years. How about that? While I was there, I did do the National Trust Preservation Leadership Training in Natchitoches, Louisiana. That again is put on by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and for a week there's a lot of expertise. Donovan Ripkema and all the big boys came in and taught us how to do everything, which was a lot of fun. Then my family moved from Iowa to Ohio, and I was just hanging out, and my former board chair is still the architect for Iowa Main Street, and he had suggested to the people at Heritage Ohio that they should talk to this Joyce Barrett who moved to Ohio. So I came in and talked to them and started working for Heritage Ohio in 2004. And since that time, I think you all know we've rebranded a little. And Frank already mentioned our mission is saving the places that matter, build community, and live better. And I think we really follow that tenets. If you didn't know already, this is the part where I'm going to talk about what we do here at Heritage Ohio. And the Main Street program is our biggest program and takes up a lot of the efforts. We have 5-member staff. We follow the 4-point approach. And I've learned everything from these managers who run the Main Street approach across the state. And this is a board of directors. This happens to be Mount Vernon. We spend each year, we visit all of the communities and do an annual accreditation for evaluation purposes. Strategic planning sessions. This happens to be a DART visit. We do downtown assessment resource team visits across the state in new communities. We do revitalization trainings at least 4 times a year, plus networking with the managers. And it's really important that in Main Street, we track the reinvestment statistics. We visit a lot of communities and they'll go, we're doing Main Street, but if you are not using these statistics and understanding the impacts of your program, you're not doing Main Street. We spend time trying to get ordinances in place that communities can take advantage of. This, it isn't just parties. It looks like a party, I know, but this is Lebanon celebrating when they got their sidewalk ordinance implemented and in use with some of their restaurants. We also do a lot of programming to help small businesses in the shop local movement. But yes, in general, we just want to make cool downtowns that are being activated. In addition to the Main Street side, we kind of have, I didn't mention, Ohio was the first state to combine Main Street and the traditional nonprofit preservation, which blend really well together. And Minnesota and the state of Washington have followed suit with that. This happens to be a map of where we've done historic tax credit education sessions in the past 10 years. But trying to get people to understand how important historic places are to their sense of place, I guess, is where we spend a lot of our time. Some of the things we enjoy doing here, Frank, you may know, has put together these Windows workshops, which are a lot of fun to learn hands-on skills. We're out on the road at least 16 communities a year, providing historic tax credit coffees, teaching people how to use the historic tax credits. Heritage Ohio has a robust easement program. This is one of the buildings in Columbus that we have an easement on. I've really enjoyed working with historic theaters across the state. And then, yeah, we do have some sad demolition stories. But as a statewide preservation organization, compared to Becky, who will be talking, she's a local preservation organization. We can't put out the fires in towns all across the state. Where we spend a lot more of our time is trying to set up the policy and changing the environment so that the locals can succeed at their own rate. But some of the other fun places that we've gotten to go, this is visiting the underground spaces under the streets in Cambridge, Ohio. Lakeside is just one of my favorite places. It's like stepping back in time. It's fun to be at the ground floor watching the arcade in Dayton that's been vacant for over 20 years, really coming back to life now with the project, and also visiting small towns. This is the ballroom in Bryan, and knowing that we've put the tools together to make things happen. Heritage Ohio started the Young Ohio Preservationist program, and this is from one of the Rust Belt takeovers where they all meet up from around the different Midwest states. This was in Buffalo. We've worked with, we had Nate, who was our young preservationist, writing for our Revitalize Ohio. So it goes from young people to older people. This is Liz Argyle in Newark, who I think she's just a hero for just taking on preservation projects and not being intimidated. We partner with a lot of other organizations in the state. Frank serves on the board of Ohio National Road. I serve on the board of Ohio Hill Country, and we partner with them. This is the Appalachia Heritage Luncheon that we do each year. Advocacy is one of the big areas that Heritage Ohio has been successful with. We go to DC once or twice a year. This is a group lobbying in DC 2 years ago. We meet with the politicians, and this is even a meeting with Congressman Steve Stivers. So you never know what's going to happen in district. Kayak, yeah. This is another in-district meeting. We toured Cincinnati with the staff from 2 different congressional offices in both Senate seats. And it's important to develop that relationship so they really understand what you're doing and what those impacts are. In 2017, Heritage Ohio was recognized with a leadership award in advocacy from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and that's one of the questions I know that's coming up, but it's one of the places we've had the greatest impact. We also meet with Main Street coordinators twice a year. This is the Midwest Partners, Preservation Partners. We met in Cleveland last year. This is the National Preservation Partners Network. We met in Cincinnati last year. We learned so much from our partners across the state. This is a picture of our board of directors. It's one of the fundamental things that we're doing when you're working at a nonprofit is working with that board of directors. But nothing gets done without having a great staff. And I threw in some pictures of old staff members that maybe some of you will remember from years past. We rode our bikes to Greenville when we were doing training on bikeability. And I can't tell you how dependent a successful organization is on having a great staff at work. And as we travel around the state, I love stopping at all the best ice cream places. So you'll find us in your town having ice cream. And finally, I have not lost my love of historic houses. This is the Sebring Mansion in Sebring in Ohio. And every time I go into another historic house, it's just that step back in time why I'm doing this, because I so connect to it. So what's next? I don't know what's next, but Becky West is next.
So where's the advance button? Just enter. There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to join Joyce today in Heritage, Ohio, and appreciate this opportunity very much. I was joking with Joyce that she may be a preservationist born, but I'm a preservationist made. I actually have a business background. I come to Columbus Landmarks, or I came there 12 years ago, and but it has truly lit a fire in me. And I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to do the work that we get to do every day. I was born and raised in Elyria, Ohio, and perhaps my fiery approach to our advocacy issues today is from the fact that my grandparents' home was demolished to make way for the Elyria Public Library on Washington Avenue. And while the library, of course, was a wonderful resource for myself and everyone else in the city, I know that our family lamented the loss of a nice piece of historic architecture. I truly am an outdoors person at heart, and this is my most recent campsite at Yosemite National Park. I'm a backpacker, but I think that truly connects to why I believe the sustainability of the built environment is really an important priority for all of us. I believe the first time that I really felt an emotional connection or had an understanding of what the built environment does was as a student at Ohio State in the 1980s. Underclassmen were put on buses and sent over to West Campus. And the building on the right that you see is where we did most of our basic level classes. And it did not feel very inspiring to me. It was depressing. I wasn't very motivated to go. However, when we finally crawl through the ranks and land on main campus and have the opportunity to learn in those buildings, it was just really struck me then about how important the built environment is and really the emotion that it can evoke and how it can contribute to our opportunity to learn and to connect. I then had the opportunity to live in the Czech Republic in Prague for a few years after the fall of communism. I had my two oldest children were there with my husband and me, and certainly Prague provided a very rich architectural experience every day. We lived off of the Old Town Square here in an apartment building that was 13th century. So it was certainly different than anything I had experienced before. So I think that I stay motivated every day to work in preservation at Columbus Landmarks because I connect to the idea that there is an immediate opportunity to create a more sustainable and culturally dynamic city here in Columbus. Columbus Landmarks was founded in 1977 following the overnight demolition of Union Station that was designed by Danielle Burnham. Fortunately, the community intervened and a group of young civic-minded individuals came together and saved that last remaining arch, and they moved it twice. And it now stands in Burnham Square in our Arena District in Columbus, and it is absolutely a treasured piece of public art today. So here's how Columbus has evolved. And I just wanted to share with you this aerial view of Columbus in the 1930s and 1950s, where you can see how very dense and built out our city once was. But then the freeways came through and skyscrapers were built and the demand for surface parking arose. We lost a lot of our architectural fabric and forfeited a lot of embodied energy in the 1970s and 80s. City Center was a mall downtown Columbus, and it was a suburban mechanism that ultimately did not work. On the left, you can see in the 80s when it is no longer there. But today, we are working on rebuilding the fabric of our downtown and activating the urban core. We don't want to repeat lessons, however, that don't support urbanism. Columbus is expected to grow by 1 million people over the next 30 years, and our housing demand is extremely high. But based on the building material warranties, some of the new construction that we're seeing is expected to last just 25 to 30 years, which presents a real conundrum for the city. I think most alarming in Columbus is the fact that we have just 14% of our pre-1945 building stock left to work with, compared to a 50-city average of around 22%. So Columbus Landmarks has become very proactive in our advocacy efforts. We have over 1,000 members and we're growing. We do about 85 tours and events annually. We host a home preservation program which provides free resources to people in Columbus who own homes that are 50 years old and older. And we're doing this with 2.5 employees, but a very strong 24-member board and over 100 volunteers. About 5 years ago, we decided to start publishing a most endangered sites list. And this is a way that would make our most important issues very, very public. We work with developers to bring resources to the table, including design professionals and experts who have the capability to assist with National Register listings, with pro forma, with ideas for the reuse of these buildings. And in addition to raising public awareness, the list helps our organization remain establish priorities for our efforts. We are determined to find productive solutions for each of these buildings. And I'm really happy to report that all 9 of these that were featured on the 2018 list are still standing. Some of them are actually, we consider saves already. Others are still pending solutions. Tomorrow evening, we are going to be hosting a member appreciation event at the historic trolley district that was once featured on the endangered list. This is going to be a really exciting time for our members to be able to explore this site pre-construction and to learn more about the plans for it, which include a new East Market and other really interesting features for the Franklin Park neighborhood where this is situated. It's really exciting to be able to celebrate a save, but there's certainly a lot that goes into it, and we appreciate all of the partners that we have working together in Columbus to make exciting things like this happen for our city. I think that one of the best things about Columbus Landmarks is the fact that our founders, many who were young people when they got their start and who are still engaged in the organization today, had the foresight to come up with a dual mission. And we do advocate for historic preservation, but also new design excellence, because we certainly want there to be landmarks in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, I guess.
So we have a few prepared questions, but I think Pearl is monitoring the questions from the group. Do you want to do the prepared ones first or take some group ones in between? Prepared ones are going to come first, guys. Okay. So Joyce, we heard from you, I liked your phrase, Becky, you're a born preservationist, not a made one. But Becky, when did you know this was what you wanted to do? You said you started in business. When did that happen and how did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. So I had a career going and then took time off with children. And I think that opportunity to have a chance to step away from a corporate track and to take stock and have the chance to come back and work for a cause was something that was extremely appealing to me. And I landed at Columbus Landmarks, fortunately. It was through some happy coincidences. And I have been there for 12 years now, and I can't imagine having it's very exciting to be able to wake up and have impact every day with the work that you are doing.
That's awesome, and it's inspiring too. Joyce, you have a much longer, deeper history. How much has preservation changed in your career?
I'm trying to, my gut reaction is it's still the same. I mean, we were just out a week ago and people still are perpetuating myths about the National Register that are not true. The National Register has been around since the Preservation Act in 1966, and people still think that it's going to hold them up, it's going to stop demolition. There's all sorts of fallacies. So it's shocking to me how people still believe demolition is progress, how people don't recognize that there are environmental impacts, jobs impacts, placemaking impacts that historic preservation provides, and they put these blinders on and they continue to go at it like it's 1965. I find it shocking. So very little actually changes. There's new people who come on the scene and there is progress that's made, but the problems are the same problems. That's a downer.
So we're also fighting the good fight in preservation. We do have a new generation, though, coming up. What advice would each of you give to people just starting out in this field?
I would say volunteer, volunteer, volunteer.
Yep. I would say jump in, you are welcome. There's definitely a place for you.
So on that order, are there any particular books or programs or websites that you can recommend people start looking at?
Well, hopefully people are tuned in today and come back for Heritage Ohio's webinars and for their conference. They certainly are a great resource, as well as the National Trust. But it seems like the conversation has grown much more broad. And I don't know if it's just because of my personal awareness or because it is. Somebody please measure that. But I love that we are getting really good, useful information and statistics from organizations like, of course, the Urban Land Institute, the AIA groups, the U.S. Green Building Council. Strong Towns has been very helpful. And then, of course, policy institutes like the Brookings Institute and others. And you don't have to look far. You know, we, of course, have so much available media, but I think it's the being able to make that, connecting the information to your community. And how can you apply what you are learning to make something happen?
And I agree 100% with Becky. What I'll piggyback is preservationists don't belong in a silo. You have to be, when you're looking at conferences, it's AIA, it's planning, it's community development directors, it's meeting transportation people, it's meeting archaeologists, it's blending across those lines of various professions that is where you need to be to grow.
I think that's an important point. I mean, a lot of the sites that you both mentioned, Partners for Public Spaces, Congress for New Urbanism, Urban Land Institute, AIA, U.S. Green Building Council, Strong Towns, none of those are primarily preservation organizations, and yet it overlaps the conservation, the sustainability, new urbanism, and preservation. They really are all pretty much working together. They take different aspects and make one or another a little bit more central to their organization, but they all really are working for the same goal. I'll just take a break here to see if any of our folks in the audience, the listening audience, have any questions. No? Okay. So ladies, what do you think was your most impactful moment? What was the thing that really defines your career and happiness in it?
Oh, Becky's deferring to me first. That's a tough question. Actually, I'm going to go back to when Heritage Ohio was given that policy award in 2017. We worked really hard to get the support. We had 13 out of 16 congressmen co-sign legislation to support the historic tax credit, and the next state had, New York had 6, and they have a lot more congressmen to begin with. We worked really hard to get support, and Ohio was one of the leaders in the nation in saving the federal historic tax credit, and certainly a lot of our congressmen and our senators were both behind us because everyone across the state has spent time supporting it, and that's important.
I think that the measurable ways that we are raising the profile of historic preservation are what I am most proud about as far as Columbus Landmark's recent accomplishments. I think that our visibility, and when I say our, I don't mean me or Columbus Landmarks, I mean historic preservation. I think we're having some really measurable, positive impact on how it is seen as an absolute viable tool. And I think that anything that we can do to continue that momentum and to broaden the scope of the practice is really just will benefit everyone, for sure.
I think it's interesting that both of you have business backgrounds. That was something that struck me when you guys were both talking. I think, and it resonates in everything that you're saying right now, the raising the profile, tracking the statistics, Joyce, and in Main Street, measuring the impact. I think from my perspective, I know I'm not supposed to be speaking, but it seems that preservation has gotten a lot more professional. Has gotten a lot more business-like. And I think that that's thanks to people like you working to make it a concrete profession over the years. We do have one question from the audience. What do you do to keep yourself from getting frustrated when it seems you're the only person in the whole team who cares about preservation?
That is such a great question. Thank you for that. There are times when it feels very, very lonely. And fortunately, you can turn to your network, the broader network, the statewide network, to get some backup. It's really, it can just feel very you can feel very defeated at times when you are not being heard or when you lose a battle, and you will. But you just have to just remind yourself about that greater good and keep trying, because what didn't work for this case, you can find a way to make it work for the next one. And just know that what you're doing is going to build, and that we're all standing on the shoulders of people who have fought these battles before us. And you're not alone.
On a lighter note and perspective, since Becky did the heavy lifting on that one, take a page out of the Young Ohio Preservationist playbook and throw a happy hour. Put it out there on social media that you're looking for other preservationists, and grow your alliance of people who think like you do, and do it on a social aspect, and develop those ties and those relationships. And then when you really need help for something important, they're there.
Honestly, even as I was asking the question, that was one thing that popped into my mind. I come hang out with you guys when I feel a little discouraged. I come hang out at Heritage Ohio. But speaking of the Young Ohio Preservationists, that is a new thing that Heritage Ohio has started several years ago. It's going great. How has Columbus Landmarks gone about engaging the younger set?
Well, like I said, our organization was founded by 20-somethings, so we have a long history and track record with staying engaged and in touch with young people. And we've done programming for youth and children over our 42 years of existence consistently. I think that we have always had young professionals serving on our board, and that is so important. We obviously, like I'm sure most organizations, are striving for diversity and diversity of thought and perspective. And who doesn't love young people? I don't know. They do bring energy and excitement and new ideas. And we are very open and welcome to them as we continue to grow our organization and do good things. And I think you did touch on something. The fun factor is so important for all of us, because you don't want to spend your time being the woe is me people. There is a lot to celebrate out there, and we have a really fantastic community, and it is a privilege to be able to showcase Columbus in the best light possible. And that's what makes it really great.
Just offer you guys a chance again. We're not getting a ton of questions in, so if you've got something and you're kind of holding on to it saying, oh geez, I don't think I'll ask, really now's the time. These ladies have a wealth of knowledge, and they're very excited to share. So here's kind of I don't want to take it in a negative route, but here's a thought-provoking one. what keeps you up at night? What are the things that you still bite your nails about?
Where is it on here? 8. Oh, thank you. I knew I jotted down notes for this one. So really what keeps, this is Becky, what keeps me awake in Columbus is truly a fear of our city becoming an any place. I did mention that we are, our inventory of historic buildings is diminishing, and with every demolition, we're feeling it. And unfortunately, some, not all, of the new construction that's happening right now is really, doesn't feel like it's being designed for the long term or with the long term in mind. And we're seeing a lot of the same product happening in this era of design. And I don't think that it's always certainly reflective of the abundance of architectural talent that we have in Columbus, but maybe more a response to a business need and to getting something done quickly. So that does concern me a lot. And it does, that is what, it's a very broad thing, and I don't feel that we are the only ones responsible for it, but I think that we all need to be aware and mindful that that doesn't happen in Columbus.
I kind of hate to admit it, but there are sometimes projects that we're working on that I do lose sleep over, and it's just, it's stupid to get wrought up over it. But a couple of things going on, current projects, there's a community that's going to lose their high school that's 100 years old because Ohio Facilities Commission can't wait to tear it down. It's really important that they tear it down right now. And it's like, it's been there for 100 years. Really, you can't wait 2 more years for a solution. That's crazy. And I get emotional about it because that's public funding, that's my money, and that isn't the way I want my money spent. And it doesn't make sense. Another community, which this story we see played out across the state, the community, the city, the municipality, the village, doesn't have the nerve to, I'm trying to keep it clean, the nerve to enforce codes, minimum maintenance, and so they let owners practice demolition by neglect, and everybody loses. In one particular community, I've just been really wrought over it because they think they're going to spend public dollars for demolition, and it's like, that's my money because you weren't enforcing code. Why should I spend my money when you didn't do your part? So I get on my high horse about issues sometimes, but it is in defense of the public good and public funds, how they're being sometimes wasted and misused.
And that's a little taste of why I come here when I'm feeling a little down. That kind of passion, it really inspires us all. It reminds us all that what we're doing is pretty important, and why we're doing it is a variety of reasons. So to take it from kind of that negative side to the more positive, Joyce, what makes you hopeful about the future? We'll start with you. So keep that passion going.
Hopeful about the future because we're right. Every time something gets restored, it's like, well, duh, we're right. We told you. So it's like, eventually, won't we make more progress? I happen to volunteer usher at the Ohio Theater here in Columbus, and I can't tell you how many times people come in and they're in awe of this beautiful theater, and it's like, or it could have been 30 parking spots. What do you think's better? You know, and there are still people who are trying to get those 30 parking spots in their town and tear something just as beautiful down. And I can keep the passion because I know we're right.
Absolutely. I think it's the people. The people is where the passion lies, and we are so excited. Tomorrow night at our event, we will be able to award or recognize 6 people who are making just have had an incredible impact on Columbus preservation and our built environment. And I think that that's what makes me most hopeful for the future is, again, you know, this movement is growing. And we are all very, very fortunate to be, as Joyce said, on the right side. The rest of them, we just have to get them to come on over.
So knowing that it's a growing movement, knowing that there are a whole lot of people that are engaging more and more every year, let's flip a little bit to the rising generation then. What advice would you give somebody who is looking to come up in a preservation? What kind of qualities does an executive director have? Those kinds of things.
I think that versatility matters. I do believe that you need to have a willingness to grow, to change, to learn, to sometimes be wrong. That's hard. And I would say learn as much as you possibly can. You know, just soak it up and don't be afraid to jump in and to start volunteering, start talking to organizations about, you know, are they going to be hiring? Can they add a position? Could you start a position with, you know, something small and let it grow? You know, we are all just trying to get a lot done with limited resources, and I think that an expansion of those is going to have a terrific impact.
Go back to the volunteer that I mentioned earlier, but I think I hope the skill set, you know, I'm not perfect. I don't have all the skills that I wish I had, but I hope that I communicate and I treat everybody like they're important, that their issue is important and what they want to learn is important. And I think communicating that you always give everybody the best deal you can is important.
So Becky, picking up on that flexibility piece that you mentioned, that was an important quality. What's a typical day in the life? Is there a typical day in the life?
The days are long. And for example, this weekend, it's usually 7 days a week. And but again, you are doing exciting things. On Saturday, we had the opportunity to showcase a beautiful mid-century modern home that a couple has lovingly restored to a T. And it is so wonderful to be able to take people to a special place and show that to them and share it and spread the knowledge of a piece of architecture, a period, the architects themselves, the history. It is just it's a privilege, truly. There are so many details, and if you are a multitasker, that would certainly come in handy for sure. And those are, you will go high and low in your career, and there will be things that you're working on that are so substantive and important, and then other things that may seem like minutia. But as Joyce said, you know, just making sure that you are connecting with the people because they're the ones who are making preservation happen. Those darn buildings can't save themselves, unfortunately.
So in preparation for this question, I actually jotted down some things to give a sense of a variety of what's going on this week. And it's multitasking. It's a lot of small things trying to work in bigger projects that have much bigger goals. So some of the things going on this week, I was working on a campaign for low-income housing tax credits. The Ohio Housing Finance Authority distributes those low-income housing tax credits, and they don't score well for historic buildings, which I think is wrong. So I was contacting a lot of state reps and community people, cities where they've redone historic schools, asking them to write OFA and explain why they should be on that scoring. We do historic tax credit coffees. We have a set coming up in June. We'll be in Elyria, Medina, Ashland, and Worcester, and I was working on that project, all of the people that need to be contacted and getting that put together. We have a CDBG, a Community Development Block Grant from the state of Ohio, and getting that draw put together, watching 2 webinars this week and giving one Frank and I sat in on Huntington Bank, gave a webinar on their new giving site, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation has a webinar tomorrow on the Tax Act and on the National Register rules changes. I worked on timesheets and expenses for everybody on staff. We all contribute to the annual report that Pearl's working on, trying to get my section in. Revitalize Ohio's getting closer to going to print, and everybody has different sections for that. I worked an hour on, we have Farewell Fridays on social media, getting that post ready for this Friday, which it's going to be Cleveland Municipal Stadium. This afternoon, Pearl and I are going to be working on an AmeriCorps application. On Friday, I'm having lunch with Donna Collins, who's the head of Ohio Arts Council, and Micah Horowitz, who's a theater volunteer, and we're talking about the future of small historic theaters, what we can be doing. I've got coffee with a manager from Jobs Ohio looking for some connections there. Thursday night, I'm going to Columbus Landmarks Foundation's reception at the Trolley Barn. I've got an executive committee call on Friday. I've had a couple of calls with board members. I've talked to several business members this week, and that's just a few of the things that I've done. It's just all different, and some of it's small, and you've got to weave, what can I get done today, what can I get off the list, and when do I have time to think about the larger projects.
So obviously there's lots of ways, there's lots of things going on. There's never a dull moment, I'm sure. And there's lots of ways for people to engage in preservation. If you're thinking, well, geez, I have to go get a degree in something and then I will be okay. You talked about theaters. If you're passionate about a theater, go see what is going on in your town or the neighboring town about saving a theater. The examples are endless. Well, if we have no more questions, I don't see any more. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you've enjoyed it, please come back. Join us a week from today in our next Profiles for Preservation webinar series. It's going to be on preservation consulting. We're going to talk with Maura Johnson from Manick and Smith Group. You can sign up for that information. The information for sign up is going to be sent out in an e-blast here pretty soon, or you can probably find it on Heritage Ohio's website as well. Thanks, everybody.